You know, there's another thing I wanted to look at. Honest to God, I don't know if this is copyright. If it is, then I'll just have to stop talking about it. But have you guys seen this solar punk animation that is on Twitter? It went quite viral, as you can see. It's really really nice. Because it's an advertisement. I'm hoping that it's not in YouTube's content ID because they would want it to be spread far and wide. Let's see. It is, of course, extraordinarily beautiful. I mean, you can't... No getting around that. It is incredibly nice to look at. I don't see the copyright thing being flagged. That's nice. Got people being happy. That's always good. Makes me happy when I see that. Now we've got a big, shiny city. The little clouds. Very little. Is this a Ghibli movie? This is an advertisement for a brand of yogurt. Not kidding. By the way, just want to say before all the cynics in chat rear up, okay? If corporations are paying artists to make advertisements and this is what it leads to, fine. Seriously, fine, okay? Literally, I don't care. Like, people are like, oh, it's corporate. I don't care. The artists who made it are still artists. They had an artistic vision they followed through on. The funding just came from a corporate source, which is the case for Ghibli films as well, We've got multiculturalism. That's great. I don't know. I'm using that as a euphemism. All we really see is people with different skin colors. But that's what multiculturalism means, when people say that. A robot warrior guardian to defend them when the night falls and the stalkers ravage the planet, And then we have text, My least favorite part of any animation. Dear Alice, so this place is yours now. It's a handful, but nothing worth doing is easy. The land is more than just dirt. If you look after it, it will feed you forever. You're a smart one. I know you'll be okay come rain or shine. And remember, a business is only as good as its people, so treat them well. Our job is to plant seeds, so our grandkids get to enjoy the fruit. So eat well, Alice, and keep planting those seeds, because how we eat today feeds tomorrow. Love, Grandma. And that's, I assume, Grandma, you see. It's my... media literacy really hitting at it right there. Right. So for those of you who don't know, what you're looking at right there is called solar punk, which is an aesthetic that's been, I think, gaining in popularity a little bit lately. You've probably heard, so everyone knows about steampunk and cyberpunk, I think. Everyone's talked about that. The punk suffix, attached to the end is, I think, primarily about being subversive and challenging established norms in some way. So nowadays, cyberpunk is the main thing people talk about, A, because of the game, and B, because it's kind of happening live right now, in real life right now, currently. And it's about a sort of aesthetic and political adoption of some stuff. Cyberpunk, you tend to have themes of transhumanism, industrialization, big, mega cities, alienation, an era in which you simultaneously have the ability to express yourself however you want, but at the same time, overwhelming corporate power means your self-expression is nothing in the face of absolute political apathy, and so on. And steampunk is about having hats with gears on it and guns that shoot steam out of, hydraulics when you reload them. That's what steampunk is about. But solar punk, let me see if I can find a nice... Yeah, here we go. Solar punk, I'm just going to mute it so I can talk, I think. Solar punk is, I think, largely about ecological sustainability, about advanced technology being used to work with the world in a sustainable and healthy and ecologically responsible way, rather than about dominating the world. It's about a sort of synthesis of natural and unnatural forces working in harmony. It's a deeply humanist aesthetic because it's kind of, I mean, it's kind of the dream a little bit, isn't it? Right? I mean, it's kind of the good ending a little bit, I think, where technology isn't just this, alienating dystopian force that robs us of our, our human desires, but is rather something that, well, does what technology was always meant to do, which is elevate us and, limit the labors we must perform and free up time and space and so on. Um, and that's really, really nice. Um, I think that's good. Of course, solar punk settings aren't as common because it's considered a fairly utopian aesthetic, and that doesn't set itself as well for conflict as, as cyberpunk with all of its social problems, or steampunk with all of its gear laden hats might. Which is why you probably don't see it as much in, popular media, which is also maybe why so many people reacted to this so negatively. There were a lot of people quote tweeting this, getting really, really angry about this. Some of them got angry over it because they found out that it was an advertisement, which again, I don't care about. I really don't care about whatever incentives were used to bring about this wonderful piece of art. There were a fair few racists complaining about it because it has the, multiculturalism, because it has, people of different skin colors. I saw one quote tweet, which was about how the only way to achieve this future would be to rid yourself of the, multicultural, multiracial elements, because that would facilitate tribalism rather than unity, which is dumb and also empirically disprovable. But what else do you expect from Nazis on Twitter? And not true, extremely not true. I agree. So there were people mad about that, and there were a weird number of people who were almost angered by the optimism of the setting, which is what I want to talk about, because racists are mad that people with dark skin next to people with light skin. That's not new. That's everything. Okay, for a lot of people, I think it's a sort of reflective dislike of the optimism of the setting. That, like, people for whom cynicism is kind of a personality trait. Um, yeah, I just yeah, people who don't like good things. However you want to put that. It is true, by the way, that right now optimistic sci-fi is like so unpopular. Everything is dystopian. Every major piece of fantastical literature, media that goes big, whether it be set in the future or the past, is about extreme social conflict, inevitable decay and destruction, blah de blah. Um, and and attempting to overcome that. You know what I mean? I mean, Christ, what was the big movie release this year? Dune? Dune! Optimistic vision of the future. Right, Jesus. I remember, and this was very much a product of the 1990s economic boom, Bill Clinton, fall of the Soviet Union, etc., etc. I remember back in the 1990s, you had Star Trek, The Next Generation. That was the Star Trek show that was playing at the time, which I loved. And it was also a deeply optimistic vision of the future, where in that... So, for those of you who have only seen, like, recent Star Trek shit, um, it's literally just like space action movies. You know what I mean? I've seen the movies. What were they? J.J. Abrams movies? The ones that were released in the most recent decade or so. The movies are just action movies set in the Star Trek universe. They're not about the optimism and the attitude towards futurism that the original show had. If you watch, for example, an episode of the original Star Trek: The Next Generation, which I really liked, by the way. There were some amazing, just incredible episodes in that show. If you actually watch the TV show, not the fucking movies, but the TV show, many of them were... I'm entirely sure how to put this. They were the kind of problems that you would expect a near utopian society to have. So, for example, and forgive my nerdiness for a bit, okay? The Enterprise, the Starship Enterprise, the ship that they flew around in, was the flagship of the Federation, of their massive multi-system governing body. And in spite of it being the flagship of that military political enterprise, it was not a warship. It carried civilians on board. It had a moderate weapons outfit on it, and it was representative of the kind of, you know, institution that would have a flagship that wasn't fitted for war. Most of the crew on the Enterprise were civilians. They would frequently be sent on scientific ventures, not military. And often in the show, by the way, the Enterprise, the flagship, would be outgunned by regular enemy frigates, regular enemy military ships, you know, that were a quarter the size of the Enterprise, because the Enterprise wasn't a warship and it wasn't staffed by soldiers, at least not all the way. And the reason why that was really, really, really important was because the attitude the show wanted to present was one in which the problems they worked to overcome, to solve, weren't ones that you could fix by having the better, you know, the better laser systems or the better photon cannons or whatever. Many of the problems were philosophical in nature, you know, overcoming matters of scientific intrigue, empathizing with two different ethnic groups on a planet and learning the respective history of their conflict and who's in the wrong for doing this, that, or the other, learning to empathize with other groups of people and their problems, you know, taking on alien cultures, solving disease, you know, finding a way to bring food to starving populations. It was a deeply humanist approach towards sci-fi that doesn't happen anymore. It doesn't. It doesn't happen anymore. Not anymore. Not modern sci-fi. Not modern fantasy or whatever. It's just not a thing we have much of an interest in because it feels sickeningly optimistic. And I feel like a lot of you would feel that way if you watched Star Trek The Next Generation today. You would be, at some points, I think you guys would almost cringe at how optimistic the writers seem to be. Where you'd watch an episode where there's this grand conflict and, you know, it's resolved with kind words and with skillful diplomacy, and you'd think, well, you know, you'd be almost embittered, like, well, that's not how it works. But in reality, you know, the idea that you can solve all the world's problems with a heavy stick and a big gun is every bit as unrealistic as the idea that you can solve all the world's problems with diplomacy. And if anything, I think The Next Generation did a really good job of building a world in which diplomacy was the most effective tool for solving a bunch of these issues. But now we don't see that, you know? Now we're all cynics. Diplomacy is just a way for, you know, leaders to sharpen their weapons and oil their guns, waiting for the next time to strike. Everything is a ploy to do this, to do that. Everything's bad anyway. The peasantry are stupid and dirty and, you know, oppressed and suffering, and bodies are buried beneath the walls that they died building, and blah, de, blah, de, blah. And there's nothing historically invalid about that, not conceptually at least. But I think it's important to have positive, aspirational visions of the future. And that's one of the reasons why I really like this ad. That's my thesis, okay? I think that it's not sufficient to produce media which highlights through allegory or just directly the problems of the present and the future. I think you also need to have positive examples for what we should strive towards, not just criticisms of the things we should look to avoid. And that's why I like this so much. We should have more media in settings like that. And I think it would go a long way towards making people think of technology with a different, you know, potential. We're massively inspired by media, you know. I bet you that this advertisement, this one right here, has inspired more than a few young people who might go on later to be artists and work on their own stuff. And maybe when they're designing some civilization, society, the clothing people might wear, this, that, or the other of a TV show, an animation, a cartoon, a comic, they'll think, well, I remember when I was young, there was this nice advertisement or whatever. But, you know, I don't remember the yogurt brand, but I do remember how happy everyone looked and how well the technology merged with the landscape and so on. And maybe they're going to make something nice and go on to inspire more people, if you know what I mean. Also, it would be pretty easy, I think, to have conflict in a solar punk setting, you know? Just because the setting isn't dystopian doesn't mean there aren't problems. Also, the fact that the society that you're fighting within is so good means there's all that much more to defend when things start to go bad, you know? If you live in a horribly dystopian society and you're fighting to defend it, it's like, you're only fighting over so much, right? But I bet you have a show where people are fighting to prevent, you know, the decay and downfall of a utopian solar punk society. People would fucking give their lives for that shit.